Israel is now having to clean up decades of the UN's failure in Lebanon. You may have seen videos showing Hezbollah fortifications, including tunnels, just 100 meters from bases of UNIFIL, the UN peacekeepers. Hezbollah drilled rock, brought supplies, and had terrorists coming in and out, all as UNIFIL watched, and did nothing for 18 years. Hezbollah attacked 25 times from near UNIFIL positions against Israel's people just over the past month. Some of those attacks were fatal. Yesterday, Iran's terror army in Lebanon launched a deadly mass casualty drone attack, killing 4 soldiers, injuring 51, from an area that UNIFIL was supposed to have disarmed. UNIFIL literally had one job, but UNIFIL didn't disarm Hezbollah. Instead, UNIFIL watched Hezbollah fortify southern Lebanon right under their noses. UNIFIL watched Hezbollah deploy tens of thousands of terrorists, hundreds of thousands of heavy weapons, rockets and missiles. And for the past year, UNIFIL watched Hezbollah rain hellfire on Israel's people. Since October 8, 2023, Hezbollah has fired 13,000 Iranian rockets, missiles and drones. 60,000 Israelis have fled their homes and run for their lives from Hezbollah's attacks, all as UNIFIL watched and did nothing. Now UNIFIL forces are refusing Israel's request to get out of the way to safety and leave the border area, as Israel cleans out the Hezbollah positions right under UNIFIL's noses. Now the UN accuses Israel of endangering UNIFIL lives. That's backwards. UNIFIL endangered Israeli lives. The UN is attacking Israel for disarming Hezbollah because UNIFIL failed to disarm Hezbollah and is responsible for Hezbollah's war on Israel's people. UN officials are attacking Israel because the only alternative is to admit that they failed to do their one job. We, the Israeli people, we didn't want to send our soldiers to disarm Hezbollah. We spent a whole year trying to avoid this war, warning Hezbollah, back off or we will have to push you away. We would rather the UN do it, like it was meant to do, under UN Security Council Resolution 1701. But it didn't, for 18 years. So we will. Not because we want to, but because nobody else will. A reminder, for those unfamiliar, what UN Security Council Resolution 1701 is and what it says UNIFIL is supposed to do. Resolution 1701 was adopted to end the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah could begin that war because it operated as an armed group distinct from Lebanon's military. The UN Security Council knew that an end to the war meant an end to Hezbollah's ability to wage war. So the resolution called for the removal of Hezbollah from southern Lebanon and for its disarmament generally. And the UN strengthened UNIFIL, the UN peacekeepers, to do and enforce exactly that. 1701, paragraph 12, quote, authorizes UNIFIL to take all necessary action in areas of deployment of its forces and as it deems within its capabilities. And pay attention, here's an important point. UNIFIL is supposed to ensure that its area of operations is not utilized for hostile activities of any kind, to resist attempts by forceful means to prevent it from discharging its duties. That's a lot of legalese, so to be clear, UNIFIL's job under Security Council Resolution 1701 is to deny Hezbollah's ability to use southern Lebanon to attack Israel's people. Instead, UNIFIL allowed Hezbollah to use southern Lebanon as its base for attacks. Did UNIFIL ever sound the alarm that Hezbollah was growing stronger and more dangerous? Please, show me where. UNIFIL was passive. It allowed itself to be pushed around by Hezbollah. If UNIFIL had followed the resolution, there would be no war today. Instead, Israel is doing now what it must to end Hezbollah's war today and prevent Hezbollah's next war tomorrow. The reason that the Israeli military is operating so close to UNIFIL positions is because that's where Hezbollah built its positions. Hezbollah chose to put UN forces in danger. I hope that UN forces can get out of harm's way, because Israel has no desire to see anyone being harmed. You know who does want to see people harmed? Hamas. Hamas is still preventing Gazans from leaving combat areas to the humanitarian zones. Literally, Israel is trying to get Gazans to safety. Hamas is trying to keep them in danger. Israel just released a recording where a Palestinian in Gaza complains, "When we follow the army's instructions and try to go to al-Mawasi, the humanitarian zone, there are people who come out and start hitting us with sticks, telling us go back, go back." When asked to clarify who's hitting them, the Gazan replies, "Hamas, Hamas." Recall that early in the war, Hamas terrorists shot at groups of Gazans to prevent them from leaving the fighting. In one instance, they even blew up a vehicle to stop people escaping. Israel is doing whatever it can to minimize harm to Gazan civilians, despite the attacks emanating from all around them. Hamas is doing everything it can to keep Gazan civilians in harm's way. Israel's goal is to remove Hamas, and that goal is unchanged because Hamas's strategy is unchanged: to try to murder Israeli children while hiding behind Gaza's children. Israel remains committed to removing the Hamas terror regime from power and rescuing the hostages from its clutches so that it can never again bring such ruin on us and on our neighbors in Gaza. We'll take questions now from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Eylon. I'm going to combine two questions from our live stream. The first one, has UNIFIL or the UN made a statement after the tunnel was discovered and its failure is now obvious to all? And the second question is, do you believe that UN forces in Lebanon have befriended Hezbollah?
Indeed, the UN has made a statement, but not acknowledging that it allowed Hezbollah to build military facilities right under its noses, instead attacking Israel for trying to dismantle that infrastructure. Israel is now doing what the UN was meant to do for the last 18 years, what the UN was meant to do over the last year that Hezbollah shot rockets at Israel from areas that UNIFIL was meant to have disarmed. Unfortunately, it's much easier for world leaders to talk about international institutions and peacekeepers and multilateralism than to deal with the reality. The UN failed. The US failed. The UK failed. China, Russia, France, they all failed. That failure allowed Iran to build a fearsome terrorist army stronger than most NATO militaries in southern Lebanon, on Israel's border, that has been waging war for the last year. The UN failed. We are suffering the consequences, and we, Israel, are now having to pick up the pieces. But as always, it's much easier for international officials to blame Israel, to scapegoat it for their failure to do their own jobs, and that way they deflect responsibility. They're still talking about a diplomatic resolution, by the way. We want a diplomatic resolution. That diplomatic resolution is meant to be Lebanon and the UN disbanding Hezbollah, because we don't want to do it ourselves. But the last diplomatic resolution failed, and so Israel is trying to enforce it by itself now. And the question you need to ask anyone who is calling for a diplomatic resolution is how you think it will be different from the last resolution that allowed Hezbollah to turn into the monstrous terrorist army that it is now, and why you think the international community will enforce the next one when it's spent 18 years doing nothing and is now scrambling to cover its tracks.
Yes, our next question is about the drone attack that you mentioned happened yesterday. What is the effect of... Eylon, you mentioned the drone attack from yesterday. Is the threat of drones something new? How is Israel dealing with this? And what is it like to be living under the threat, the potential threat, anywhere in the country of a drone attack from multiple directions?
The threat of, pardon me, the threat of drone attacks is new in this war. It is one of the most terrifying developments because Israel's Iron Dome facility, which is able to shoot down rockets, can't necessarily target drones. We're talking about small aircraft that fly not very high above the ground and can maneuver, and that makes them very difficult to intercept. We've had drones coming from all possible directions. A massive drone attack from Iran back in April. Drones coming from the Houthis in Yemen. A few months ago, they hit an apartment block in Tel Aviv and murdered a man in his bed. On Yom Kippur, we had a drone attack from Hezbollah in Lebanon that crashed into an old age home. in Herzliya. And just yesterday, the biggest mass casualty incident since the October 7th massacre itself, when Hezbollah in Lebanon sent a suicide drone into Israel, killing 4 Israeli soldiers, seriously wounding 7, and wounding many others. There were no sirens, they weren't picked up, and this is going to be a serious challenge for Israel going forward to try to deflect the attacks from drones, which are very cheap to produce and very difficult to intercept. And that's a reminder that Israel needs to be at the top of its game and needs to have all the top defensive capabilities, and why it is so dangerous right now that anti-Israel activists around the world are trying to destroy cooperation between Israel and neighboring countries, to cut off arms supplies, because they want to leave Israel exposed and vulnerable as it is fighting for its life on 7 fronts against an Iranian regime and their proxy armies with increasingly sophisticated weapons.
This is a question from our YouTube live stream from Tabia in Germany, who asks, can Israel stop allowing UNRWA to be present in Gaza and or the West Bank? Is anyone going to de-radicalize the Palestinians after the war?
The international community is going in the wrong direction now if we want to see sustainable peace between Israel and our neighbors, the Palestinians. In order to make that possible, we need 3 things, the 3 Ds. Destroy Hamas. There can be no peace while Hamas still governs Gaza. Demilitarize Gaza. There can be no peace if Gaza is still controlled by a terrorist group with rockets and weapons. And de-radicalize Palestinian society. The Palestinians in Gaza need to understand that their leaders are responsible for the horrific decision to drag them into the October 7th war out of a commitment to a forever war to destroying the state of Israel in any borders whatsoever. The more steps we have by the international community to tell them October 7th was the right thing, the more likely they are to relapse into terrorism. That's what happens when countries like Norway, Spain, and Ireland recognize a non-existent Palestinian state. That's what happens when countries like the UK commit more funding to UNRWA. They're telling the Palestinians that terrorism works. Unfortunately, even our allies are sending the wrong signals to the Palestinians out of a complete misunderstanding about the conflict that we are in. For over 100 years, the Palestinian National Movement has been fighting a forever war to destroy Israel and have been unable to accept Israel's permanent existence. And if you want your leaders to promote peace in the Middle East, instead of pushing it further away, you need them to empower the Palestinian leaders who are willing to stand up and say that the state of Israel has a right to exist as the Jewish homeland. But as long as they empower the people who think that terrorism is the way forward, they are pushing peace further and further away.
Eylon, this is a question we're getting on multiple platforms. It's been a number of days now since Iran fired 180 ballistic missiles at Israel. What will the Israeli response be? When should we expect it? And what else should we know about this situation?
It has been 2 weeks since one of the biggest ballistic missile attacks in history. 200 ballistic missiles. Everyone in the country had to run for shelter. And Israel is weighing up its response. We have just received a delivery of very sophisticated anti-ballistic missile systems from the United States. And Israel is planning its response. The defense minister is warning that it will be serious, that it will be a surprise, that the Iranians will not understand where it is coming from or how it happened. Now, we don't know exactly when this is going to happen. Israel will have different strategic considerations about whether to do it now or a little bit later. Let's remember that the Iranian regime built Hamas and Hezbollah in order to protect the regime. And those terrorist armies are now on their feet, on their knees. Israel has decapitated Hezbollah's leadership. It has reduced its weapons stockpiles to maybe a third of what they were. It's possible that Israel wants to weaken Hezbollah a little bit further, to weaken Iran's defenses before taking on Iran itself. But the whole world needs to be prepared for what is happening. Israel will strike Iran. And Israel will strike Iran because if it does nothing, it will send the Iranian regime the message that it can shoot ballistic missiles at us with impunity, that it can fire ballistic missiles, send a whole country into the bomb shelters, and there will be no consequences. If that's what Israel does, the next ballistic missile attack will only be a matter of time. So we need our allies to stand by us as we show the Iranian regime that there are consequences to its aggression, and the war that they are fighting against us on 7 fronts.
Our final question today is from Rachel on Instagram, who asks, how is Eylon staying sane in these times?
Coffee. No, I'm joking. Look, everyone in Israel is operating under immense pressure and stress since the October 7th massacre and the war that it started. We are fighting for our lives on 7 fronts. On any given day, we have rockets and drones from 4 or 5 different directions. It's scary, it's deeply disconcerting, and it's important that people find time to check out a little bit, relax, switch off their phones, take a digital detox, disconnect from the news, enjoy time with their friends and their families, and remember what really matters. Go out, take a deep breath, go for a walk, enjoy the sunshine, enjoy the beach. Okay, that's all we have time for today. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Israel time. Please follow the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office on all the social media platforms and help to get our message out to the world, because we are fighting for our lives, and your support and you speaking up really, really helps us hold the fort. Thank you very much.